About a month ago, I made this video geared towards demonstrating the laughable beliefs that Jay Dyer holds due to his deficient presuppositionalist methodologies. Unfortunately, I never received a response from Jay, but I got the next best thing, a response from Jay's presuppositionalist lapdog, JimBob. JimBob responded to my video, or at least half of my video, during one of his live streams over at his channel, Made by JimBob. Needless to say, his response left much to be desired. And before we jump into the substance of JimBob's response, or lack thereof, I want to highlight an important point here because though I try my best to engage amicably and in good nature with those I disagree with, JimBob does not seem to repay this sentiment relating to intellectual discourse. For example, in his live stream response, he constantly bemoaned that I was poisoning the well in my castigation of Jay's worldview, which is an ad hominem fallacy. And yet, this is how JimBob decided to compose himself throughout his response.
Terrible human being, this guy. That's not a contradiction, you dipshit. Are you retarded? Are you an actual living retard?
Or we die.
What a scumbag. This guy's a total scumbag. You dipshit. You dipshit retard. Oh, man, this makes me so angry. It just makes me so damn mad.
I just get so mad. I just get so mad. I just get so mad.
Just went to confession this morning, too.
You know, what's interesting about this is that JimBob is supposed to be a Christian, right? JimBob is supposedly an ambassador for Christ. And yet, this is the petulant manner in which he composes himself while addressing positions he disagrees with. It kind of reminds me of Titus chapter 1, verse 16, which says, "They claim to know God, but by their actions they deny him. They are detestable, disobedient, and unfit for doing anything good." I don't know, seems applicable to someone like JimBob. And so I think it's also fitting if JimBob keeps his mouth shut when it comes to accusing others of ad hominem attacks. And for my viewers, if I'm a tad snarkier in this exchange than I normally am, hopefully you'll find that my frustration is well-founded. So let's get into the substance. Recall that in my original video, I chastised Jay Dyer for his negligent mix-up of metaphysical beliefs with empirically inferred beliefs. That is, Jay incorrectly classified a belief in the age of the earth as both metaphysical and a priori. Here are the original clips.
I'm saying that they make the same mistake that you make, which is to think that looking at a piece of data like a rock or geologic structures itself a priori gives you an aeon's timeline of date, when the same model of a creationist model can accurately and sufficiently explain that as well.
Well, I don't think figuring out how old the Earth is a giant metaphysical question. It's just
there you go. So there you just demonstrated my point that science-y men have no idea what metaphysics is, and they don't even realize that absolutely that's a gigantic metaphysical question. Of course it is.
So again, notice what was claimed by Jay in those clips. Jay classified inferences regarding the age of the Earth as inferences carried out a priori, which they are not. They are inferences carried out a posteriori. And Jay also classified the very same inferences as, quote, metaphysical, which they're not. They're empirical inferences. Now, JimBob apparently wasn't listening carefully to these clips because he claims that Jay was referring to the age of the universe and not the age of the Earth.
No. The universe. When you say the universe, that's metaphysics. You're assuming something you don't have access to, the universe. That's the point.
Again, in the clips I provided, Jay was specifically speaking of the age of the Earth, not the universe. So JimBob didn't even address my arguments. And even if Jay were referring to the age of the universe, he would still be incorrect to label this a metaphysical endeavor. But we'll get to that in a bit. Jumping back to the age of the Earth, the original topic under discussion, recall that I made an argument regarding the fact that determining the age of the Earth is not an a priori endeavor, but rather is an a posteriori endeavor. Watch JimBob stumble through his response trying to put the pieces together in his head in real time.
No, dude. You don't have... Look, the a priori is things that you come to without the sense data. And the post is after, through your experience, after you get all these things, you gather. Okay? No. You have no access to anything in the past. You have nothing in the past you have access to. So you can't say that you have the latter because you don't have access to the empirics of deep time. You don't have access to that. So you can't derive it from that. You have to assume it. You can't derive. You don't get that from sense at all. There's no experience any one of us has of 14 billion years ago. None.
No. JimBob seems to think that because we don't have direct access to the past, any empirical investigation we perform is therefore not a posteriori. This is a non sequitur. We investigate the past primarily through the evidence we do have, even though that evidence is given to us in the present. This investigation is, by definition, a posteriori. You can't sit in an armchair and investigate the world empirically, JimBob. That's not the way this works. Apparently, JimBob thinks that when homicide detectives arrive on the scene of an apparent murder, they can't gain knowledge a posteriori because they weren't around to see the murder happen. This is asinine. Empirically investigating the world, such as determining the age of the Earth, is not an a priori endeavor. And what's interesting to note here as well is that you can tell JimBob doesn't understand the distinction between a priori and a posteriori knowledge because, number one, he can't even correctly pronounce the term a posteriori, as we'll see in just a second, and two, he blatantly mischaracterizes it.
That's not what scientific theories are. Scientific theories aren't arrived at from a posteriori philosophy. You actually have to do an experiment for a scientific theory.
JimBob, the pronunciation is a posteriori. Sound it out, attaboy. And second, if you have to run an experiment in order to justify a scientific theory, then this is indeed an a posteriori endeavor. Running scientific experiments is a form of empirical investigation, which entails that scientific experiments are, by definition, a form of acquiring a posteriori knowledge. You can't sit in an armchair and reason your way through scientific experiments, and therefore, scientific experiments are not a priori, but are a posteriori. See, this is what happens when someone live streams their initial responses to an argument without thinking these things through. All JimBob knows is that he's on Team J. Dyer, and therefore he'll engage in any form of confirmation bias and ad hoc rationalizations in order to discount the opposition. Now, returning to the age of the Earth, recall that not only did Jay incorrectly label the endeavor of inferring the age of the Earth as an a priori endeavor, but he also incorrectly labeled a belief in the age of the Earth as a metaphysical belief. And as I argued in my original video, this is simply not true. Metaphysics asks questions regarding the fundamental nature of things that exist. It doesn't ask questions regarding empirically contingent facts like how old is the third planet from the sun. And so, following this line of thought, I issued a challenge to Jay. Here's the challenge I issued, followed by JimBob's response. Well, listen, Jay, if you're watching, I have a challenge for you since you're such an expert in metaphysics. If inquiring into the age of the Earth is an a priori metaphysical endeavor, I challenge you to find me one, just one, textbook on metaphysics that includes it as a domain of inquiry.
What?
Just one metaphysical textbook should prove your point.
Metaphysics, reality. This is what, it's so easy. First of all, this is fallacious. If something's not found in a metaphysics book, that's not evidence of either position being true, you dipshit. You dipshit retard.
When someone like JimBob resorts to childish attacks like that, that's how you know that their position is bullshit. Nevertheless, JimBob claims that the fact that metaphysics textbooks don't include the age of the Earth as part of their subject matter isn't evidence for either view. I beg to differ. If determining the age of the Earth was in fact a metaphysical endeavor, as both Jay and JimBob claim, then we'd expect to find traces of this in the relevant philosophical literature. For example, every philosopher agrees that inferences regarding the nature of, say, universals is part of metaphysics. And this is why if you open any textbook on metaphysics, you'll see a chapter on universals. So, why do no textbooks on metaphysics include chapters or discussions regarding the age of the Earth? Do you know why? Because determining the age of the Earth is not a metaphysical endeavor. It's an a posteriori empirical endeavor that requires empirical investigation and scientific experimentation. The age of the Earth is a scientific question, not a philosophical one. Jim Bob, you don't know what the hell you're talking about, and clearly philosophy isn't your strong suit. Maybe you should have stuck to jewelry making, bud.
I prefer to do engagement rings. That's what I went to school for.
Now, although Jim Bob clearly has a deficient understanding of philosophy, let's also keep in mind that he's a young Earth creationist, just like Jay. So how does Jim Bob address and argue against the unambiguous scientific data from, say, radiometric dating that is used to date an old Earth?
Oh, you believe in the age of the Earth? Is it pretty verifiable? Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's totally verifiable. How? We know how old dogs are when they die after 7 days. Okay, great work. How can you tell me when you know the Earth is itself? What do you mean by that? Is the Earth an identity? Yes. Okay, so how do you know the start of the identity of the Earth if it's made up, from your view, of accumulative particles of things that are not the Earth? What do you mean? You believe that the Earth, in some sort of cosmic bang, aggregated unrelated particular matter into a globular shape, right? Yeah. Okay. At what point did you say the Earth was born? Here's the real presupposition here. The presupposition is actually the identity of the Earth itself. It's actually a philosophical notion that the Earth has an identity at all. And I know people go, oh, this is presup nonsense. It's really not. It's really not. It's not presup nonsense. It's totally and completely a valid insight to say the real presupposition isn't just billions of years time, deep time assumption of reality, but the presupposition that's really just blatantly there is that there is a distinct moment the Earth becomes the Earth.
Now, Jim Bob actually has a point here, though we'll see shortly that it doesn't do anything to bolster his position in the least. He's correct to point out that if one is to speak of the age of something, this presupposes an understanding of a distinct moment in which this something gained its identity. The pertinent question then is, do scientists have an understanding of when the Earth became the Earth? The answer is, yeah, they do. Astronomers have lines of demarcation that differentiate the boundaries between planetesimals, protoplanets, and planets. And they have a solid understanding of how and when what is now the Earth existed in these different astronomical formations with different accretions and planetary differentiation. Jim Bob seems to be under the impression that scientists and astronomers have never thought through these meteorological issues, but he's only demonstrating that he himself is not well informed on the subject. It's also important to point out that even if scientists had not thought through these issues carefully, Jim Bob's position would still be untenable. For even if astronomers incorrectly projected the formation of the Earth into the period when it was really a protoplanet and not yet a full-fledged planet, this would only increase the age of the Earth, not decrease it. That is to say, there's no practice of dating the Earth here that would reduce its age to anything close to what Jim Bob's religious dogmas would need it to be. So even if we take Jim Bob's argument at face value, this would effectively increase the age of the Earth, not decrease it. But of course, this is not the only line of argumentation that Jim Bob takes against dating the age of the Earth. Watch Jim Bob fumble through an incoherent ramble regarding how scientists can use dating methods to date something like a recently deceased animal, but how these methods fall apart when applied to the Earth.
There was a guy who called in. He was arguing that when you examine the potassium in a dog, someone who doesn't know the date of the dog's birth and death could come up with a general conception of it and get close. But the reason they know that it's close is because they have access to the dog, right? So that's verification. They don't have this for, say, something when they hold a piece of material and they say, well, based on the dog, this thing needs to be 500 million years old. Well, no, you don't have the same epistemic criteria. You're using different things now at that point. You're just making an assumption, an extrapolation. And there's no justification for extrapolation unless you have access to extrapolation. But you don't. You only have access to the here now.
JimBob actually said there's no justification for extrapolation unless you have access to extrapolation. What? That's not even a coherent statement, JimBob. Nevertheless, JimBob's argument regarding using dating methods to estimate the age of a deceased dog is even more laughable. He states that the methods that allow a veterinary pathologist to accurately infer the age and date of death of a dog are qualitatively different than the methods that allow geologists and astronomers to infer the age of the Earth because the pathologist has access to the deceased dog? Is JimBob unaware that we currently have access to the Earth? I mean, we're literally standing on the damn thing right now. We have access to its various minerals, elements, and isotopes and can use these in our dating methods. There is no qualitative difference here. JimBob claims the issue is a qualitative difference related to epistemology, but he never cashes this out in any substantial form, other than his incoherent statement we just surveyed regarding extrapolation. Now, let's shift away from the age of the Earth and focus on the age of the universe, because remember, JimBob believes in both a young Earth and a young universe. So, how does JimBob go about arguing for the latter? Well, JimBob never actually provides any evidence for a young universe, at least not in his response to me. He just asks what he thinks are deep, troublesome philosophical questions for those like myself who affirm a universe that is billions of years old. For example, I mentioned in my original video that one avenue scientists take to infer the age of the universe is through calculating the expansion rate of the universe and extrapolating that into the past, a relatively straightforward determination. Here was JimBob's response.
There's no expansion rate of the universe because you don't know what the thing is. How can you have an expansion rate of the universe if the universe is made up of particulars? What's expanding? This is all trickery. This was actually demonstrated quite well when Eli debated Peterson, because he asked Peterson essentially what's reality. He said, oh, the universe. We're looking at the universe. Is that a set of particulars or is that a unified one thing? The universe is expanding. What's that? See, I could blow up a balloon, and because the balloon has contours and has an identity, I could say the universe, the balloon is expanding. I could say the liver of a duck when we're making foie gras is expanding. But when you say the universe is expanding, you're saying a metaphysical term is expanding. That doesn't make any sense. That's incoherent.
Once again, JimBob could answer his own questions if he ever just picked up and read a book on physics. When physicists say that the universe is expanding, what they mean is that the fabric of space-time itself is expanding or stretching. And contrary to what JimBob says, space-time itself is not a metaphysical term. It's physical, measurable, and quantifiable. We can literally quantify how fast or slow someone or something is moving through space-time. On top of that, JimBob's whole question regarding whether the universe is one thing or a set of particulars is a false dichotomy. In fact, he gives an illustration of a balloon expanding as an example of one thing expanding as opposed to a set of particulars expanding, all the while oblivious to the fact that a balloon is also a set of particulars, i.e. molecules, atoms, and matter that make it up. So JimBob has inadvertently disproved his own point. Even more so because one real-world object that physicists use to illustrate the expansion of the universe is, you guessed it, a balloon. Now, I do loosely agree with JimBob that if one decides, as an ontological naturalist might, that the universe itself constitutes the fundamental nature of reality, then this is a claim beholden to the domain of metaphysics. However, this doesn't thereby entail that determining the age of the universe is a metaphysical endeavor. Identifying, say, the essence or nature of the universe might be a metaphysical endeavor, but determining its age would still be an empirical and scientific question. Whew. Okay, let's pivot from the age of the Earth and the age of the universe to evolution. Recall that in my original video, Jay articulated that the best argument against evolution from a philosophical standpoint that essentially sealed the deal for him to reject evolution was a 17-page polemic written in 1964 entitled Evolution and the Traditional Idea of Immutability of Species by philosopher Titus Burckhardt. I subsequently went through the article and highlighted the abysmal and ignorant argumentation of Burckhardt at various places. For example, I highlighted a paragraph of Burckhardt's whereby he argues against the possibility of transitional forms by way of personal incredulity. That is, he argues that, for instance, his inability to conceive of a transitional form between land and marine mammals is somehow indicative of whether or not those forms exist in the first place. I pointed out that an argument from personal incredulity is a fallacy. Here was JimBob's response.
Yeah, that's right. What he's saying is that it's ambiguous, that you have to have all these in-betweens that need their own identity. Like I said, like I argue in every evolution debate, you start from one thing and then you end with another, and then you interpolate in between that some change happened. But if change happened, then there's a bunch of other necessary generations of entirely new kinds of species in between. But you don't have a standard to delineate between the two. It's all just completely arbitrary. There's no, you can't even tell me how many types of animals there actually are. You can't even tell me how many different species or kinds of animals as a population exist in between one and the other.
Notice that no actual argument was made by JimBob here. He articulated that one, given two ends of a transitional gap, this entails that there would exist generations of entirely new kinds of species. Well, yeah, and? I mean, all he's doing is restating a stipulation that is entailed by evolution. Now, JimBob's second point from that clip is that given two ends of a transitional gap, we are unable to predict the number of species in between said gap. Now, he's actually incorrect here. Shocker, I know. If we were given only the fossil record, then yes, it would be largely impossible to determine precisely how many species fall in between two related species. But thanks to DNA sequencing, we can construct phylogenetic trees, and by subsequently applying mathematical models that account for speciation, extinction rates, and genetic divergence, researchers can infer how many species likely existed in a lineage over time, even when fossils are absent. We won't get exact numbers from an endeavor like this, but we'll get close enough to easily answer this challenge posed by JimBob. Now, jumping back to Burckhardt's fallacious reasoning, which JimBob never actually addressed, I pointed out in my original video that Burckhardt's lack of imagination was quite deficient indeed, because we don't even need to imagine what a possible transitional species that's smack dab in the middle of land and marine mammals would look like, because we have modern day examples right in front of us. I took the hippo as one example, though there are others like sea lions. I pointed out that species such as these are examples that share characteristics of both land and marine mammals, and therefore can be easily conceived of as the type of species that would be a transition between the two. What clever and astute insight did JimBob have as a retort to these examples?
No, that's presupposing they're in a transition, you dipshit. These people are actual lunatics. We are observing a hippopotamus. It's literally in between becoming a mammal, a land animal, and a water animal. See? See it happen? See what it's doing? See what it's doing? See it? Look at the hippopotamus. It's in between being a water and land animal. It's literally in transition. It's trans. It's a trans hippo.
All JimBob has to offer is superficial rhetoric. It's no wonder he's Jay Dyer's #1 fanboy. JimBob doesn't make arguments, he just engages in ad hominem attacks and empty rhetoric. In fact, I think the only thing made by JimBob are ad hominem fallacies and shitty philosophical inferences. The only claim JimBob made in that clip that even remotely addressed my point about the hippo is when he said that my use of the hippo as an exemplification of a transitional species presupposes that the hippo is in fact a transitional form. But no, JimBob, you're incorrect here. Shocker, I know. My exemplification of the hippo was not proffered with the assumption that the hippo is in fact a transitional form. Recall that my original point regarding the hippo was in response to Burckhardt's claim that he couldn't possibly imagine what a supposed transitional form in between land and marine mammals could look like. My point then was that we don't have to imagine. We have species like the hippo and like the sea lion that harbor properties and attributes that a transitional species would have. That's it. That's the argument. And JimBob couldn't grasp it. Psst. JimBob might be a moron.
What?
Now, my last point of contention for this video is a point where JimBob accused me of being intentionally deceptive in my treatment of Burckhardt's article. Jim Bob claims that I intentionally left off one of Burkhart's paragraphs because it supposedly would have been detrimental to my case. What we'll see, though, is that the paragraph itself is easily falsified, and Jim Bob's attempted defense of it falls short.
Nothing can be produced from a thing that is not contained in it. By this fact, every species, every genus, or every natural order develops within the limits proper to its bare fruits according to its own kind. Yeah, this is when we have nature and person. That our person is proper to our nature, our energy, the things we do, the thing we're capable of, the things we can't do. It's always proper to our nature. So he kind of, he calls it, if he calls it Platonism, it doesn't matter what the critique guy calls it. It's just that it's kind of interesting he left out the next paragraph, right? What happened, skeptical agnostic? Why did you leave out the next paragraph? Because the next paragraph is something you can't argue with without mangling your philosophy.
Now, contrary to Jim Bob, I didn't deliberately leave off that paragraph of Burkhart's in order to be deceptive. Burkhart's article is 17 pages long, and I can't devote time to every single paragraph in the article in a video that's supposed to be about Jay Dyer. The paragraph simply wasn't germane to the point I was making. But now that Jim Bob brought it up, let's see how it actually embarrasses his position. So Jim Bob fervently affirms the notion, as Burkhart articulated in that paragraph, that, quote, nothing can be produced from a thing that is not contained in it, end quote. Interesting. I wonder if Jim Bob is familiar with humans who are born with tails. In case you were unaware, humans actually retain genes to produce tails, yet these genes are suppressed. But in some individuals, the tail suppression pathway fails, and they are subsequently born with the vestigial tail. Now, disclaimer, this is not an actual picture of a person born with a tail, obviously. I wanted to put an actual picture of an infant born with a tail, but I wasn't really sure how YouTube would look at that and whether or not they would take this video down. So go ahead and Google it yourself and take a look at infants that are born with tails. And in fact, in our embryonic development, everyone forms a tail with accompanying vertebrae. It's just that this tail and the extra vertebrae regress and are eventually absorbed into the embryo. So, Jim Bob, if nothing can be produced from a thing that is not contained in it, then why do humans have the ability to produce tails, both during birth and embryonically? If nothing can be produced from a thing that is not contained in it, then you either need to explain why humans have the potential disposition to produce tails, or else you need to concede that the statement is false. Your move. Whew. All right, that's the gist of Jim Bob's response to my video. Are you exhausted? Because I know I sure as hell am. You know, what's interesting to note is that Jim Bob only got halfway through my original video, despite the fact that that day his entire live stream was over 5 hours long. He didn't even address some of the best parts of my video, in my opinion, regarding Jay Dyer's embarrassing argument against the existence of Tiktaalik, his non-belief in the past existence of dinosaurs, and his laughable non-belief in heliocentrism. I mean, I guess when your entire live stream consists in 5 hours of ad hominem attacks and shitty reasoning, you get tired. Now, despite the fact that due to the nature of Jim Bob's petulant response, I really have no respect for him as an individual, I do, however, maintain respect for the nature of intellectual discourse. And during Jim Bob's response to my video, he did articulate that he would be interested in a debate. And I'm happy to say that I would oblige. And in fact, I think it would be trivial for us to debate the age of the Earth or the theory of evolution, especially given that neither I nor Jim Bob are geologists or biologists. No, I think that what we've seen is that the issues here are philosophical, and Jim Bob's worldview is really what needs to be challenged. So, Jim Bob, this is a challenge for you. If you would like to debate the truth of your Christian worldview, let's see what you got. Whew. All right, everyone, if you made it this far, you have boatloads of patience. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.
I'm on a bouncy ball. I'm on a bouncy trampoline, and I'm bouncing, and I bounce. And I am bouncing, and I bounce a lot.